one of the most important questions you can ask about anything in order to think about it is, why is something the way it is? And that's what the because clause really forces a student to do.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. So, Andrew, this particular podcast fits in the series that we're working on this year called Laying the Foundation. Right. Kind of that idea of back to the basics. And the reason we are talking about this particular podcast is because we're talking about the word because and how it promotes thinking.
Well, okay. How many times in one day do we use the word because?
Right.
It would be so interesting to have a way to log that.
And dear listener, I'm just going to tell you right now that as we got ready for this podcast, Andrew said to me, there's no way we can spend 20 minutes talking about because.
Which is good news for you, listeners. You'll be done in, 13 or 14 minutes, I'm sure.
I think there's so much wisdom that you're going to be sharing, Andrew, that you may not even know you have. But let me just kind of set the scenario. We are in our recording studio here in Bixby, Oklahoma, and Andrew is teaching the Teaching Writing Structure and Style course to a room full of teachers, some new to IEW, some very experienced, and he starts teaching the stylistic techniques. Actually, from the very beginning, I'm taking notes on possible podcast topics that can go with this idea of laying the foundation, because truly the Teaching, Writing, Structure, and Style is a foundational course. This is what we hope all teachers have an opportunity to participate in. Yes. And so I'm taking notes, and you said when you teach students how to use the because clause, you are helping them think. And I wrote that down and said, wow, that is going to be an absolutely fantastic episode, because it's going to be talking about laying the foundation and thinking, and we do both.
Yeah. Well, part of my whole, odyssey from the beginning to here was being confronted in some cases or having a little bit of internal questioning, just, kind of pushing against a little bit. Okay, Webster came up with this system. Is all of it something worth promulgating? And my first experience of a question like this occurred the second time I ever did what I had created and called the TWSS seminar. Of course, in the early days, it was one day, and it was all 9 units.
Oh, wow.
And I had a 16-page handout. So it was very rudimentary, and I did it for a school that in a town where I'd lived, that I knew many of the people, had gone to church with many of the people there. And I was going through the style techniques, and I got to the because clause, and I'm just, teaching it the way we did it in Canada and the way I'd been doing it with kids. And I never really stopped to wonder, is this even a good idea? And one of the teachers, a second grade teacher, we got to this point, and she popped up her hand, and yes, and she said, I would never teach my students to use the word because in their writing. And I'm young. I don't know what I'm doing. She's obviously an experienced second grade teacher. So I naturally said, why not? And her answer, ironically, if I recall correctly, and I believe I do, was because they do it anyway. So I started to think about that question and that answer, and I came to a few conclusions. The first thing that I realized was that it's smart to have some things in the checklist that are easy, that are natural, that are colloquial in a way, And I came from Suzuki method background where you'd have kind of a harder piece. And then you'd have kind of an easier piece that you could learn more quickly and easily. And then you'd have a little bit of a harder piece that would require a little more effort. And then you'd have a little bit of an easier. And I realized that there was some wisdom in not having everything just be a new hard thing, but to have a break and let everything kind of solidify. And so when she said, well, they do it anyway, I thought, of course, it's one of the words we probably use dozens, if not hundreds of times a day, depending how much we talk. And so putting that in writing would be a natural thing for young children. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. Webster put it in there, not because it's hard, but because it's easy. Maybe. And then over the years, I would get people kind of, and students too, students, parents, teachers saying, this because clause seems to be awkward. It's the one that when you force it in, it just seems unnatural, and we don't like that. I came to a couple conclusions. Number one, it's okay. It's okay to have on the style checklist a thing that is a little awkward, because that's how you learn to make it less awkward, by doing it, by kind of stressing yourself a little bit in that way.
Every mother of a violin student or a saxophone student knows that it's going to sound bad sometimes.
Yeah. So don't be afraid of awkwardness. And that became a theme that I have continued to coach people, just because it's common sense, really. If you introduce a new idea and you force it, it could be awkward, but that's okay. However, it was when I kind of really dug into the teaching of Unit 7, right? And we got to this problem of inventing content and coming up with enough to write about, that I started to realize one of the most important questions you can ask about anything in order to think about it is, why is something the way it is? And that's what the because clause really forces a student to do, isn't it?
Yes, exactly right. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking of a couple things. One is in some of our advanced materials, the university-ready writing, and then we teach this in the new teaching, writing, structure, and style, the thesis, and how to come up with the thesis, almost with a formula, but then you take out some of those words. Although, blah, 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 I think, but of course you have to get out the I in there because it's formal writing. I think this because this, and then you just get rid of the although, I think, because, but that becomes that formula to, as you say, force thinking. The other thing I was thinking about as you were telling your story, you had a teacher who, and this is now because we have because as a dress up, and then we also have it as a sentence opener.
Well, no, not really. To clarify, and this was where I broke with Webster ever so slightly. I realized that this checklist is growing and it can hit a point of being cumbersome. And I would be the first to admit that I have personally experienced trying to force a because clause into a paragraph and just couldn't figure out a way to do it that was not slightly awkward or unnatural. And so I came to this decision, I guess, that when we introduce the number 5 sentence opener, which is when, while, where, as, since, if, although, that is the point, plus or minus a little bit, but that's generally the point where I will say, okay, everybody, we are going to eliminate the because dress up and add it as an option to the when, while, where, as, since, if, although dress up.
Oh, okay.
And then it becomes the because. So you get the www.asia.b, which has no meaning, but is easier to remember. So now there's only 5 dress up. And you can use or not use the because clause as it's appropriate. And this usually is happening later in the year or second or even third year, where students are now, they have the freedom, because it is grammatically, it's the same thing, right? It's creating a a dependent adverb clause. And so after that, I will say now the clausal sentence opener, you may use the word because. But I always give a little caveat here, which is number one, if you start a sentence with the word because, you must have a comma, right? Because if you don't have a comma, you run a huge risk of it being a fragment, which is what all the poor second grade teachers were allergic to.
Well, and that second grade teacher told you why she doesn't like the word because with a fragment, because they do it all the time.
Right. Which, well,
It
the
was
way we speak, the way
it's
there was
conversational,
a multi-level beautiful irony, and I really appreciate the experience, because if she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have this to talk about.
It's true.
So then we move into a point of freedom and refinement. And as I say when I introduce all the style techniques, the goal is not to do every single one of these things in every paragraph of everything you write for the rest of your whole life. Right? The goal is to get so good at it that you can do it and then graduate from the checklist and then use or not use the techniques as opportunity or demand presents itself. So those, and then the other caveat, just so I don't leave a loose end here, is I always tell people I tell kids, there are opinions about whether or not you should start a sentence. You could legally start a sentence with the word because. Some people, I guess very old school, would say never do that. That's probably a died out, for the most part, attitude, but you might bump into someone who kind of passed that on from generation to generation, like why you cut the end off the ham when you put it in the pan or something.
Exactly right.
And other people have done it, and it's not a problem. But let's err on the side of being safe. If you do it, check and be sure you have a comma, and the thing after the comma is the subject of the sentence, and then 98% of the time you're safe.
Yep. I love that you encourage the teachers all the time in these podcasts, in that teacher training seminar that we just recorded, to do the assignments. Because if they do the assignments, they're going to be better writers and experience the system themselves so that they can have some empathy, but some more knowledge about how this works.
Right. It's kind of as though, and I had a teacher who came to my seminar once. I remember this pretty well, as a matter of fact. It was in Spokane. She came up to me, and I knew she was a high school English teacher, which made me, always a little bit cautious, especially in my early years, because they might know more than I do. And what did I do? But she was very kind. She said, before I came into teaching, I was a journalist. I was nominated for a Pulitzer. I have been a writer my whole life, and now I teach it. And this has been a really good experience for me, because I realized that I can easily get in a rut and just kind of do things the same way. And using this checklist has stretched me a little bit to realize, I don't just have to kind of write the way I always do. And we all have that. We have all of our habits, our speech habits, our thinking habits, obviously things that challenge our habits can be uncomfortable, but sometimes really beneficial. So I think linguistically, that checklist had that effect for her. And I thought, okay, that's probably good for all of us. And of course, I experienced a similar thing, though I was never nominated for anything. But I experienced that with Webster, being almost weirdly fanatical about getting everything in. And when I finally got it, and I just worked to make it fit and sound good, and I thought, wow, that was a lot harder than it would have been if I just did it without thinking about all those techniques and how to fit them in. And that's not necessarily a better thing. Right? Hard can be good because it stretches your mind. It stretches what you're capable of thinking. So the humble little because clause.
Right. Stretches thinking, gives us the opportunity to defend our position. I think it's worth spending a whole episode talking about because we are the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and our tagline is listen, speak, read, write, think, and because is just one of those words that can help us do the thinking while we're learning to write.
I do believe that learning to write and not outsourcing that the way so many people think you could do now actually does help you learn to listen better. And I actually flashed on this yesterday, and I thought, because I know something about constructing language, I'm able to listen and understand language better.
Yes.
It's kind of like when you study logic, you then listen differently because you kind of think syllogistically, and you're looking for what are the premises, what's the conclusion, is that valid? If you don't study logic, you don't quite have the tools to do that. You may have an intuitive sense. Well, that's not a good argument, but why? So with grammar, in the same way, when you learn to construct language, then you learn to see weaknesses in language that can often kind of be a covering of what's really meant or really said or really true. And so you can kind of see through superficiality. I think these are the best reasons to teach grammar and logic, because it's not that you use it per se on people, but it's you become better at noticing when people might be trying to use that on you.
Right, exactly. And, I've said this before. It's one of my momilies, those expressions I used for my kids growing up, that if I said them now, they could finish my sentence. And I would say, hard work, and they would finish my sentence, is immensely satisfying. And that is so true. You're talking about you're completing that paper for Dr. Webster and using 6 dress-ups, 6 sentence openers, knowing all 6 decorations, but using them appropriately. And of course, with IEW, we've changed it a little bit so that ultimately there's 5 dress-ups. We're so nice. 6 sentence openers and 6 decorations.
Well, and don't forget a triple.
I was getting there.
Gotta have
and the
a triple.
Triples that are in there and the advanced style. My dear friend sent me a text message yesterday and said, Julie, I am now an accredited instructor with IEW. So she persevered, pushed through, and did it herself, and she never thought it was going to be possible. And it is possible. And I think it's even more possible with our new Teaching Writing Structure and Style, now 3rd edition. You talked about how your first time you taught this, it was just a 16-page handout?
16-page handout.
Yes. And then you did the first edition, the official first edition that we published and sold, and that had maybe 120 pages?
Well, there was 60-some, and then after a couple years, I put together an appendix.
Oh, right.
To add on to it, because I didn't want to have to redo all the videos.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then we did our tips and tricks to also extend the life of that a little bit longer. But then when we did the 2nd edition, we completely rewrote the seminar workbook, and that blossomed to well over 200 pages.
Ballooned or bloated might be a better B word for that. But,
to that end, I just want to kind of just speak to how amazing the 3rd edition is. I think we landed in the balance. It's not 16 pages, but it's not close to 300 pages. The seminar isn't one day. We did record it over a number of days, but the amount of time that the teachers are watching is significantly shortened, because what we wanted to do was do exactly what I said at the very beginning. Lay the foundation, stick to the basics, make sure that it's not overwhelming, because we don't want it to be easy plus a lot, or hard plus a lot. We want it to be appropriate.
Those practicum assignments, they go pretty fast.
Well, but you can space it out. But this seminar workbook has around 170 pages or less. So I believe that we have struck a balance, and it's just fun. And I will say this, if you haven't yet seen any of the sample videos that we have online, we'll put a link in our show notes to it. You can see this really cool bookcase that we have in the back that we've put some artifacts on, including, and you can't see it very well, but our video team did put the picture of you learning violin with Dr. Suzuki superimposed over the video.
You can also see how much I've aged in 10 years.
You look great, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe to our podcast in iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcasts. Here you can also find show notes and relevant links from today's broadcast. One last thing, would you mind going to iTunes to rate and review our podcast? This really helps other smart, caring listeners like you find us. Thanks so much.